The galactic core was unlike anywhere the combined fleet had ever seen. Ancient stars burned with strange colors, and space itself seemed to twist and bend. At the center of it all was the ancient device, a massive structure that had been built by the first civilization in the galaxy. Admiral Kate Wilson stood on the bridge of the horizon, watching the swarm surround the ancient device. The machines were working frantically to connect their network to the alien technology. If they succeeded, their plague would spread beyond the galaxy to consume the entire universe. How long before they complete the connection? Wilson asked Dr. Harper. Harper studied his readings. Maybe 6 hours? The ancient device is fighting their intrusion, but it cannot hold them off forever. Wilson looked at the tactical display. The swarm had positioned itself in a perfect defensive sphere around the ancient device. Breaking through would require everything they had. "Signal the fleet," Wilson ordered. "This is our final battle. We either stop them here, or the universe dies." The combined fleet of 3,000 ships prepared for the assault. Captain Pete Davis checked his weapon systems one final time. His Zephyrian crew had been fighting alongside humans for months now. They had learned to trust each other completely. "All squadrons, form up for attack formation," Davis commanded. "We go in fast and hard. No holding back." Captain Amy Robinson was leading a group of human destroyers. Her ship, the Explorer, had been modified with the best technology from every species in the galaxy. She looked at her crew, humans, Zephyrians, Ethereals, and others, working together as one team. "Remember what we are fighting for," she told them. "Not just our worlds, but every world that will ever exist." The battle began with a massive coordinated assault. The combined fleet struck the swarm's defensive perimeter with everything they had. Energy weapons lit up the space around the ancient device. Missiles and projectiles filled the void between the stars, but the swarm was ready. They had learned from every previous battle and adapted their tactics accordingly. The machines fought with desperate efficiency, knowing that their survival depended on protecting the ancient device. Captain Jeff Morgan led his fighter squadron through the swarm's defenses. His pilots came from 6 different species, but they flew together like they had trained for years. "We need to get close to that device," he told them, "whatever it takes." The fighters darted between the massive swarm units, using their speed and agility to avoid the mechanical plague's weapons. But they were taking heavy casualties. For every fighter that made it through, 2 more were destroyed. Dr. Harper was working frantically on the bridge of the horizon. "I think I understand how the ancient device works," he told Wilson. "It is designed to create quantum tunnels between galaxies. If the swarm controls it, they can spread their plague across the universe." "Can we destroy it?" Wilson asked. "Not with conventional weapons," Harper replied. "But if we could overload its power core, the resulting explosion would destroy everything in this system, including the swarm." Wilson understood what he was suggesting. That would be a suicide mission for whoever pilots the ship. "Yes," Harper said quietly, "but it might be the only way to save the universe." The battle raged on. The combined fleet was making progress, but slowly. The swarm's defenses were incredibly strong, and they were adapting to every new tactic the Alliance used. Commander Lucy Carter's sister, Lieutenant Jenny Carter, was piloting a quantum weapon carrier. The devices built after the Nexus battle were smaller and more powerful than the original versions. She was approaching the ancient device's power core. "Jenny, you are taking heavy fire," warned her escort. "Pull back." "Negative," Jenny replied. "I am almost in position. Tell my family I love them." Her ship was torn apart by swarm weapons just as she reached the power core. But she managed to activate the quantum device before her ship was destroyed. The resulting disruption caused massive damage to the swarm's coordination network. The swarm began to fragment again, but this time they adapted more quickly. New communication nodes formed within minutes, restoring their coordination. The machines were learning faster than ever before. "We are running out of time," Wilson said. "The swarm is almost connected to the ancient device." Captain Dan Wright was leading the final assault wave. His mixed squadron of human and alien ships was the last reserve the fleet had. "All units, concentrate fire on the device's connection points. We stop them here or not at all." The ships charged directly into the heart of the swarm. The mechanical plague swarmed over them like angry insects, but the pilots kept fighting. They knew this was their last chance. Wright's ship was overwhelmed, but he managed to ram it into one of the swarm's connection points. The explosion severed the link between the machines and the ancient device, but only temporarily. "The connection is re-establishing," Harper reported. "We have maybe 30 minutes before they complete the link." Wilson made the hardest decision of her life. "Prepare my ship for a suicide run. I will overload the ancient device's power core myself." "Ma'am, there has to be another way," protested Robinson. "There is not," Wilson replied. "Someone has to. Do it, and I am in command. The responsibility is mine." As Wilson prepared for her final mission, she received an unexpected communication. It was from Jake Morrison, who had been coordinating the political aspects of the war from Earth. "Kate, you do not have to do this alone," he said. "I am coming with you. Jake, this is a military operation. You are a diplomat. I am also a human being," Morrison replied. "This war started because humanity refused to abandon the innocent. I will not abandon you now." Morrison's ship, the Peacemaker, joined the horizon as they approached the ancient device. Behind them, the remains of the combined fleet provided covering fire, buying them precious time. The two ships flew directly toward the ancient device's power core. The swarm threw everything they had at them, but the pilots pressed on. They knew that the fate of the universe depended on their success. "Power core in sight," Wilson reported. "Beginning overload sequence." The ancient device began to glow with increasing intensity. The power core was building toward a massive explosion that would destroy everything in the system. But the swarm was still trying to complete their connection. "Connection at 90%, Harper reported from his ship. "You have maybe 2 minutes." Wilson and Morrison worked together to overload the power core. The ancient technology was more complex than anything they had ever seen, but they managed to figure out the control systems. "Overload sequence activated," Wilson announced. "All ships retreat to minimum safe distance." The combined fleet began to withdraw, but many ships were too damaged to escape. Captain Pete Davis made the decision to stay behind and hold the line, giving the others time to reach safety. "This is for my empire," he said as his ship was overwhelmed by swarm units. "And for all the friends I have made among the humans." The ancient device's power core reached critical mass. The explosion that followed was visible from neighboring galaxies. The intense energy wave destroyed everything in the system. The swarm, the ancient device, and the ships that had stayed behind to ensure the mission's success. Wilson and Morrison died in the explosion, but their sacrifice saved the universe. The swarm was completely destroyed, and the ancient device was reduced to cosmic dust. The survivors of the combined fleet returned to their home worlds as heroes. The war was over, and the galaxy was safe, but the price had been enormous. Billions of people had died, and entire civilizations had been consumed. In the aftermath of the war, a new galactic council was formed. This time, it was based on the principles that humanity had demonstrated during the crisis. No species would be abandoned in their time of need. All civilizations would stand together against threats to the galaxy. Ambassador Jake Morrison's replacement, Captain Amy Robinson, gave the opening speech to the new council. She spoke about the courage of those who had died and the lessons their sacrifice had taught. We learned that true strength comes not from advanced technology or superior numbers, she said. It comes from the willingness to stand up for what is right, even when the odds seem impossible. The new council chamber was different from the old one. Instead of separate sections for each species, the representatives sat together in mixed groups. Humans sat beside Zephyrians, ethereals worked with crystalline hive members, and former enemies had become trusted allies. The war had changed the galaxy forever. The species that had once looked down on humanity now recognized their wisdom and courage. The humans who had been seen as young and foolish had proved themselves to be the moral leaders of the galaxy. Years later, children from every species learned about the war in their schools. They studied the battles at Haven and Nexus, the courage of the volunteer fleets, and the final sacrifice at the galactic core. But most importantly, they learned about the choice that had started it all. When the other species had turned their backs on the innocent, humanity had taken a step forward. That single act of courage had inspired a galaxy and saved the universe. It became the foundation of a new age of cooperation and unity among the stars. The memorial at the galactic core bore a simple inscription: in memory of those who chose courage over comfort, sacrifice over safety, and hope over fear. They turned their backs on nothing and stepped forward. Ambassador Jake Morrison stood before the emergency session of the Galactic Council. The Great Hall was different now. It had been moved to an underground bunker on the Zephyrian homeworld. The alien leaders sat in reinforced chambers protected by layers of defensive shields. The situation has changed, Jake said, his voice echoing through the chamber. The Void Swarm is not just consuming worlds randomly. It is moving toward the galactic core with a specific purpose. First Mind Zorvash of the Ethereal Collective spoke without emotion. We are aware of the ancient device at the core. Our records show it was built by the ancients millions of years ago. Then you know what will happen if the swarm reaches it, Jake replied. The device will amplify their power across the universe. Every galaxy will face the same fate as ours. Ambassador Krell of the Zephyrian Empire shifted uncomfortably. Even if this is true, what can we do? Our fleets are defending our homeworlds. We cannot spare ships for another hopeless attack. Jake activated a holographic display showing the volunteer fleet. These ships are not hopeless. They are carrying quantum disruption weapons that can confuse the swarm. We have tested them successfully. A few hundred ships against millions of swarm units, scoffed Krell. It is suicide. Maybe, Jake agreed. But it is better than sitting here waiting to die. The debate continued for hours. The alien leaders were torn between their fear of the swarm and their shame at abandoning the fight. Finally, First Mind Zorvash spoke for the Ethereal Collective. We will contribute our remaining fleet to this mission, not because we believe it will succeed, but because we have learned something from your species. Sometimes the right thing to do is also the most difficult thing to do. One by one, the other governments agreed to commit their forces. The Zephyrian Empire would provide their heavy cruisers. The crystalline hive would wake their dreadnoughts from dormancy. Even the mysterious Void Walkers agreed to send their stealth ships. Captain Pete Davis was preparing his ship for the final battle. The Zephyrian officer had been working with human engineers to combine their technologies. His vessel now carried both alien energy weapons and human quantum devices. Sir, we are receiving new fleet assignments, reported his communications officer. The combined fleet will be under human command. Davis was surprised. Admiral Crawford is taking overall command? No, sir. Lieutenant Kate Wilson has been promoted to Fleet Admiral. She will coordinate the final assault. Davis nodded with respect. Wilson had proved herself at Haven and in the battles that followed. She understood how to fight the swarm better than anyone else alive. Admiral Wilson stood on the bridge of her new flagship, the Horizon. The ship had been heavily modified with the best technology from every species in the galaxy. She was looking at the largest fleet ever assembled, over 3,000 ships from dozens of different worlds. "Ma'am, the quantum weapon carriers are ready," reported Captain Amy Robinson. "All 5 devices are operational." Wilson studied the tactical display. The swarm was approaching the Nexus cluster, the last major system before the galactic core. If they could not stop the machines here, nothing would prevent them from reaching the ancient device. "Signal the fleet," Wilson ordered. "All ships, prepare for hyperspace jump. We make our stand at Nexus." The combined fleet emerged from hyperspace. At the edge of the Nexus system, the swarm was already there, consuming the outer planets. The mechanical plague had grown enormously since the battle at Haven. It now covered half the star system like a dark cloud. "Swarm size estimate is 20 million units," reported the sensor operator. "They are moving in perfect coordination." Wilson took a deep breath. "Begin the attack. All ships engage the enemy." The battle was unlike anything in galactic history. Ships from every major civilization fought side by side against the mechanical plague. Zephyrian cruisers fired alongside human destroyers. Ethereal energy weapons combined with crystalline hive particle beams. Captain Jeff Morgan led the first wave of fighters. His squadron included pilots from 6 different species, all working together despite their differences. "Remember, we are not trying to destroy the swarm," he told his pilots. "We are trying to clear a path for the quantum weapons." The swarm adapted quickly to the new tactics. They had learned from every previous battle and were ready for the combined fleet strategies. But the diverse nature of the alliance worked in their favor. The machines could not adapt to all the different technologies at once. Dr. Harper was aboard the Horizon, monitoring the quantum weapons as they moved toward their targets. Each device was being carried by a volunteer crew who knew they would not survive the mission. "The swarm is trying to intercept the weapon carriers," he reported to Wilson. "They seem to understand the threat. Then we make sure they do not succeed." Wilson replied, "All ships protect the quantum weapons at all costs." The battle raged across the entire star system. Ships exploded in brilliant flashes of light. Swarm units swarmed over damaged vessels, consuming them to fuel their own growth. But the combined fleet kept fighting, driven by the knowledge that this was their last chance. Commander Lucy Carter was piloting one of the quantum weapon carriers. Her ship, the Volunteer, was a modified transport vessel that had been stripped of everything except the weapon and its activation system. "Lucy, you are taking heavy fire," warned her escort, Captain Dan Wright. "I can cover you, but you need to hurry." "Almost there," Lucy replied. She could see the swarm's core formation ahead. Millions of mechanical units moved in perfect harmony, all connected by their quantum network. Beginning final approach. The other weapon carriers were also approaching their targets. Each pilot knew they were about to die, but they also knew their sacrifice would save billions of lives. "All quantum weapons in position," reported Harper. "Activating in 3.2.1. The 5 devices detonated simultaneously. The quantum disruption spread through the swarm's network like a virus, introducing chaos into their perfect coordination. For the first time since the war began, the machines began to attack each other. "It is working," shouted Wilson. "The swarm is fragmenting." The mechanical plague split into smaller groups that fought amongst themselves. Without their shared intelligence, they became vulnerable to conventional weapons. The combined fleet pressed their advantage, destroying swarm clusters that could no longer coordinate their defenses. But the victory was not complete. The quantum disruption was temporary, and the swarm was already beginning to adapt. New network nodes were forming. trying to restore their coordination. "We need to hit them again while they are confused," Wilson ordered. All ships full assault. The combined fleet charged into the disorganized swarm. Ships from every species fought with desperate courage, knowing this might be their only chance to win. The battle was fierce and costly, but they were making progress. Captain Pete Davis led a squadron of mixed ships against a large swarm cluster. His Zephyrian vessel fought alongside human destroyers and ethereal energy ships. The diversity that had once divided the galaxy was now its greatest strength. "Target their communication nodes," Davis ordered. "Do not let them re-establish coordination." The battle continued for hours. Slowly, the combined fleet began to gain the upper hand. The swarm was still dangerous, but they were no longer unstoppable. For the first time in the war, the machines were retreating. "Ma'am, the swarm is withdrawing toward the galactic core," reported Robinson. "They are abandoning the Nexus system." Wilson nodded grimly. "They know we can hurt them now. They are running to their final objective." The combined fleet had won the battle, but the war was not over. The swarm was still moving toward the ancient device at the galactic core. If they reached it, all their sacrifices would be meaningless. "Signal the fleet," Wilson ordered. "We pursue them to the core. We finish this fight." The greatest battle in galactic history was yet to come. But for the first time since the war began, the defenders had hope. They had proved that the swarm could be defeated. Now they had to prove it again at the most dangerous place in the galaxy. The combined fleet followed the retreating swarm toward the galactic core, where the final battle would determine the fate of the universe. Behind them, the Nexus system was safe, but ahead lay the greatest challenge any civilization had ever faced. The courage that had started with humanity's refusal to retreat had spread across the galaxy. Now, united in purpose, they would face the ultimate test together. The battle for Haven lasted 3 days. Colonel Torres and her mixed force of humans and aliens fought street by street as the void swarm consumed the planet. The machines were relentless, but the defenders fought with courage that surprised even themselves. Commander Ryan Blake died on the second day. His ship, the Liberty, was surrounded by swarm units that tore through its hull like paper. His final message to the fleet was simple: keep fighting. Never give up. Lieutenant Kate Wilson took command of what remained of the human fleet. Only 12 ships were still functional, but they continued to harass the swarm. Each attack bought more time for the evacuation ships to escape. On the planet's surface, Torres made her final stand at the main spaceport. She had 50 soldiers and about 200 alien volunteers. They had set up defensive positions around the landing pad, where the last transport ship was loading wounded civilians. "The swarm is breaking through the eastern perimeter," reported Sergeant Bill Rogers. He was a young Marine who had volunteered for the mission, despite having a wife and baby back on Earth. Torres looked at her remaining ammunition. They had enough for maybe an hour of fighting. "We hold until the transport is loaded, no matter what." The swarm units moved like a silver tide across the spaceport. They were the size of small cars, with multiple arms that could reshape themselves into tools or weapons. When they encountered resistance, they simply absorbed the defensive barriers and became stronger. Corvag, the elderly Zephyrian leader, stood beside Torres with an ancient energy rifle. "I have lived for 300 years, he said. "I have never seen courage like this." "We do what we must," Torres replied, echoing the words that had become the human battle cry. The final transport ship lifted off just as the swarm overran the spaceport. Torres and her defenders were consumed along with the rest of Haven, but their sacrifice allowed nearly 2 million people to escape. Dr. Alex Harper was aboard one of the evacuation ships, still working on his research. The quantum disruption device was nearly complete, But he needed more data about the swarm's network. The information was being transmitted back to Earth, where other scientists were working around the clock. Maya Lopez had stayed behind to help with the evacuation. Her engineering skills were needed to keep the overloaded transport ships running. She watched Haven disappear behind them, knowing that brave people had died to save the refugees aboard her ship. "Dr. Harper, I have an idea," she said over the communication system. "What if we do not try to destroy the swarm's network? What if we try to confuse it instead?" Harper looked up from his calculations. "Explain. The swarm learns from every attack, but what if we could make it learn the wrong things? Feed it false information?" Harper's eyes lit up. "That might work. But we would need to get a quantum transmitter very close to the swarm, close enough to inject false data into their network." "That is a suicide mission," Maya said quietly. "Yes." Harper agreed, but it might be the only way to stop them. The news of Haven's fall reached Earth within hours. The planet had been completely consumed, turned into raw materials for the swarm's growth. The mechanical plague was now estimated to be twice as large as before. Admiral Ben Crawford was in command of Earth's remaining forces. He had watched the battle for Haven through long-range sensors. The courage of the human defenders had inspired him, but it had also shown him the terrible truth. Conventional weapons were useless against the swarm. "Sir, we are receiving volunteers from across the galaxy," reported his aide. "Individual ships, not official fleets. They say they were inspired by what they saw at Haven." Crawford was surprised. "What kind of ships?" "Merchants, miners, even some military vessels whose crews went against orders. They want to join the fight." Crawford nodded slowly. "Tell them they are welcome. We need all the help we can get." Captain Julie Adams was one of the volunteers. She commanded a mining vessel called the Defiant. It was not a warship, but she had armed it with mining lasers and explosives. Her crew was made up of humans and aliens who had decided to stand and fight. "We saw what happened at Haven," she told Crawford over the communication link. "Those people died for us. The least we can do is try to honor their sacrifice." The volunteer fleet was strange and diverse. There were cargo ships armed with improvised weapons, racing vessels that had been converted into fast attack craft, even a few alien warships whose crews had defied their governments. Orders to retreat. Captain Pete Davis commanded one of those ships. He was a Zephyrian who had served in his empire's navy for 50 years. When his government ordered a retreat, he had refused to obey. "I will not abandon the innocent," he had told his crew. "Anyone who wishes to leave may do so. But I am staying to fight." His entire crew had chosen to stay with him. They were now part of the growing rebel fleet that was gathering around. Dr. Harper arrived on Earth with his research data and the prototype quantum disruption device. He immediately began working with Earth's top scientists to improve the weapon. They had perhaps 2 weeks before the swarm reached the next populated system. "The device works," he told Admiral Crawford, "but it has to be delivered manually. The carrier ship will not survive the mission." Crawford studied the weapon specifications. "How many of these can we build?" "With Earth's resources, maybe 5, Harper replied. "But we need rare elements that are only found in certain star systems." "I will get you those elements," Crawford promised. "Whatever it takes." The volunteer fleet spread out across the galaxy, searching for the materials needed to build the quantum weapons. It was dangerous work, as many of the resource-rich systems were near the swarm's path. Lieutenant Amy Robinson led a team to the Vega system, where rare crystals could be found. Her ship, the Explorer, was a small science vessel that had been hastily armed for the mission. She knew the risks, but she also knew that failure meant the end of everything. "We are detecting swarm scouts in the outer system," reported her sensor. Operator, they are moving toward the crystal mines. Then we get there first, Robinson said. Full speed. The race against time was desperate. The human and alien volunteers worked together to gather the materials needed for the quantum weapons. They fought off swarm scouts and navigated dangerous asteroid fields. Many ships were lost, but they succeeded in their mission. Back on Earth, the weapons were being built in secret facilities. Each device was roughly the size of a small fighter craft and contained enough quantum disruptors to theoretically confuse an entire swarm cluster. Maya Lopez had returned to Earth to help with the construction. She worked 18-hour days, knowing that every minute counted. The swarm was getting closer to the core systems, and the retreating alien governments were beginning to panic. The Ethereal Collective is requesting a meeting, Crawford's aide reported. They say they have information that might help. Crawford was skeptical. They abandoned us before. Why should we trust them now? Because some of us never abandoned. You, said a familiar voice. Third Mind Kalen appeared on the screen. I have been watching your fight. Your species has shown us something we had forgotten. What is that? Asked Crawford. That wisdom is not the same as cowardice, Kalen replied. We thought we were being wise by retreating. But you have shown us that sometimes the wise thing to do is to stand and fight. Kellen's ship arrived at Earth carrying advanced technology that could improve the quantum weapons. He was not the only one. Individual aliens from across the galaxy were arriving to help with the war effort. The swarm is not just destroying worlds, Kalen explained to Harper. It is moving towards something specific. We believe it is trying to reach the galactic core. Harper studied the star charts. What is at the galactic core? An ancient device, Kalen said. It was built by the first civilization in our galaxy. If the swarm reaches it, they will be able to spread beyond our galaxy. They will consume the entire universe. The stakes had just become unimaginably higher. The volunteers were not just fighting for their own worlds anymore. They were fighting for everything that had ever lived or ever would live. The first quantum weapon was ready for testing. Commander Sam Torres, Nina's younger brother, volunteered to pilot the test mission. He would take the device close to a small swarm cluster and activate it manually. This is for my sister, he said as his ship launched, and for everyone who died at Haven. The test was successful. The quantum disruption device confused the swarm cluster, causing the machines to attack each other instead of their intended targets. But the victory came at a cost. Sam's ship was destroyed in the process. It works, Harper told the assembled volunteers. But we need to get all 5 devices to the swarm at the same time. If we only use 1 or 2, the swarm will adapt, become immune to the effect. The plan was set. 5 volunteer crews would carry the quantum weapons on a suicide mission into the heart of the swarm. They would activate the devices simultaneously, creating enough confusion to cripple the mechanical plague dot as the volunteers prepared for their final mission. They knew that their actions would determine the fate of the galaxy. The alien governments had turned their backs on the threat, but humanity and their allies were ready to take the final step forward into the unknown. Commander Ryan Blake stood on the bridge of the warship Liberty. Around him, the human defense fleet was preparing for battle. 200 ships moved through space toward the outer rim. It was not a large fleet by galactic standards, but it was all that Earth could spare. The fleet had been assembled quickly. Mining ships were fitted with weapons. Cargo vessels became troop transports. Even civilian ships volunteered to help with evacuations. Ryan knew that many of these crews would not return home. Sir, we are receiving a transmission from the colony world of Haven, reported Lieutenant Kate Wilson. The void swarm has been detected at the edge of their system. Ryan nodded grimly. Haven was home to 3 million people. Most were human colonists, but there were also thousands of alien refugees who had fled their homeworlds. Now they were trapped. How long before the swarm reaches the planet? Asked Ryan. 18 hours, sir. Ryan turned to his communications officer. Contact Colonel Nina Torres. Tell her to begin immediate evacuation of all civilian populations. On the surface of Haven, Colonel Torres was already moving. She had been a Marine for 15 years, but she had never faced anything like this. The reports from other worlds were terrifying. The void swarm left nothing behind. Not even ruins. The evacuation ships were landing at every spaceport on the planet. Human and alien families rushed aboard with whatever they could carry. Children cried as they were separated from their pets. Elderly beings struggled to walk up the loading ramps. We need more ships, Torres told her aide. We can get maybe half the population off the planet before the swarm arrives. Admiral Crawford is sending every transport he can spare, the aide replied. But it will not be enough. Torres watched as a Zephyrian family boarded one of the evacuation ships. The parents were trying to calm their frightened children. These people had already lost their homeworld to the swarm. Now they were running again, not in space above Haven. The human fleet waited. Ryan could see the swarm approaching on his sensors. It looked like a dark cloud spreading across the star system. As it moved, it consumed everything in its path. Asteroids, space stations, even cosmic dust, all of it was being absorbed. Admiral, we are getting a closer look at the swarm, reported the science officer. Each unit appears to be about the size of a small fighter craft, but there are millions of them. Ryan studied the display. The swarm moved like a living thing, but it was made of machines. Each unit was connected to the others, sharing information and coordinating attacks. It was like fighting a single massive organism with millions of bodies. Sir, the first evacuation ships are launching from Haven, reported Wilson. But we still have 2 million people on the surface. Ryan made a decision. That would haunt him for the rest of his life. We hold the line, whatever it takes. The human fleet moved to intercept the swarm. The ships spread out in a defensive formation, placing themselves between the mechanical plague and the planet below. Ryan knew they could not win, but they could. Buy time. The first contact was devastating. The swarm ships were unlike anything in human military doctrine. They absorbed energy weapons and adapted to projectile fire. When human ships fired missiles, the swarm units simply caught them and converted the explosives into more of themselves. They are learning from our attacks, reported the tactical officer. Each weapon we use becomes less effective. Ryan watched his ships dying on the tactical display. The destroyer Courage was overwhelmed by swarm units that tore it apart like insects. The cruiser Defiance lasted longer, but it too was eventually consumed. On Haven, Dr. Alex Harper was working frantically in a makeshift laboratory. He had been studying the swarm wreckage from previous battles. There had to be a weakness somewhere. The machines communicate through quantum entanglement, he told his assistant, Maya Lopez. They share information instantly across the entire swarm. That is how they adapt so quickly. Maya was an engineer who had volunteered for the mission. She had left behind a comfortable job on Earth to help fight the swarm. If they all share the same network, then disrupting that network might confuse them. Harper looked up from his microscope. That is exactly what I was thinking. But we would need to get close to the swarm to implement it. Very close. Above them, the space battle continued. Ryan's fleet was being steadily destroyed, but they were inflicting damage on the swarm. More importantly, they were learning. Each battle provided new information about how the enemy functioned. Captain Tim Foster was leading a group of smaller ships in hit-and-run attacks. His ship, the Ranger, was fast and maneuverable. He could strike at the swarm and escape before they could adapt. We need to target their communication nodes, Foster told his squadron. If we can disrupt their coordination, we might be able to slow them down. The small ships darted in and out of the swarm like angry bees. They could not do much damage, but they were buying precious time for the evacuation. On the surface, Torres was loading the last of the transport ships. She had managed to evacuate nearly 2 million people, but there were still 1 million left on the planet. The swarm would reach Haven in 2 hours. "Colonel, we have a problem," reported her aide. "The Zephyrian refugee camp is refusing to board the ships. They say they would rather die than run again." Torres ran to the refugee camp. Hundreds of Zephyrian families were sitting in the open, waiting for the swarm to arrive. Their leader, an elderly being named Korvac, stood before them. "We have run enough," Korvac said to Torres. "Our homeworld is gone. Our fleet has abandoned us. We will not spend our final hours in terror." Torres looked at the alien families. They had lost everything, but they still had their dignity. "Then, we will stay and fight with you." "You are humans," said Korvac. "This is not your fight." "Yes, it is," Torres replied. "We are all in this together." In space, Ryan's fleet was down to 50 ships. The swarm had adapted to most of their weapons. But the humans kept finding new ways to fight. They rammed their ships into swarm clusters. They used their reactors as bombs. They fought with a desperation that the machines could not understand. "Sir, we are receiving a transmission from an unknown source," reported Wilson. "It appears to be coming from the Ethereal Collective." Ryan was surprised. The Ethereals had withdrawn from the war. "Put it through." A ghostly figure appeared on the screen. It was not First Mind Zorvash, but a younger Ethereal. "Commander Blake, I am Third Mind Kalen. I have been watching your battle. Have you come to help us?" asked Ryan. "I cannot speak for my people," Kalen replied. "But I have seen something today that I did not expect. Your species fights not for conquest or glory, but for others. You risk everything to save people who are not even your own kind." Ryan looked at his tactical display. The swarm was only an hour away from Haven. "We do what we must." "Perhaps," said Kalen, "but what you must do is not what others would choose. My ship is small, but it carries weapons that might help. Will you accept aid from one who has already abandoned you?" Ryan smiled grimly. "All help is welcome." The ethereal ship joined the human fleet. Its energy weapons were more advanced than anything Earth possessed. Together, they managed to slow the swarm's advance. On Haven, the last transport ship was preparing to launch. Torres had loaded it with children and elderly beings. She chose to stay behind with the volunteers who would make their final stand. On the planet's surface dot, as the swarm finally reached Haven, the defenders looked up at the dark sky. The machines were coming like a storm cloud of death, but they were not alone. Humans and aliens stood together, ready to fight for their home. Battle for Haven was about to begin. Jake Morrison stood in the great hall of Nexus Prime Station. The massive room was filled with beings from across the galaxy. Some had blue skin and 4 arms. Others looked like walking trees with glowing eyes. A few had scales that changed color when they moved. Jake was the only human in the room. The emergency meeting had been called 3 days ago. Reports were coming in from the outer rim of the galaxy. Entire star systems were going dark. Planets were being stripped bare. Something was eating its way through space, and it was getting closer. Ambassador Krell of the Zephyrian Empire was the first to speak. His voice was deep and rumbling. "The reports are clear. The void swarm has awakened. Our oldest records speak of this threat. It destroyed civilizations millions of years ago." Jake had read those same records. The void swarm was described as a plague of machines. They consumed everything in their path. They turned planets into raw materials to build more of themselves. Nothing could stop them. They had vanished long ago, but now they were back. What do we know about their current position? Asked First Mind Zorvash of the Ethereal Collective. The floating being spoke, without moving its mouth. Its words appeared directly in everyone's mind. Captain Lisa Kane stepped forward from the human delegation. She had been commanding the Earth vessel Horizon when the first reports came in. Our scouts tracked them through the Kepler system. They consumed 4 planets in 6 days. Each world was completely stripped. No survivors. The room fell silent. Jake could feel the fear spreading through the assembled representatives. These were the most powerful beings in the galaxy. They controlled fleets of warships and commanded technologies that humans could barely understand. But they were afraid. The swarm moves in a pattern, continued Lisa. They take everything from a planet and use it to build more machines. Our estimates show they double in size every time they consume a world. Dr. Alex Harper, Earth's chief scientist, activated a holographic display. An image showed the galaxy, with red dots marking the swarm's path. Based on their movement, they will reach the core systems in 18 months. If they continue to grow at this rate, nothing will be able to stop them. Ambassador Krell's scales turned dark purple. The Zephyrian Empire has decided to withdraw all forces to our core worlds. We will build defensive barriers and wait for the threat to pass. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. The Zephyrians had the most powerful military in the galaxy. If they were retreating, what hope did anyone have? The Ethereal Collective agrees, said First Mind Zorvash. We will seal our dimensional barriers. This threat is beyond our ability to fight. One by one, the other species announced their retreat. The crystalline hive would go dormant in their crystal caves. The void walkers would disappear into hyperspace. The machine union would shut down all non-essential systems and hide in their fortress. Worlds.Jake looked around the room in disbelief. These were the civilizations that had existed for millions of years. They had survived wars, plagues, and cosmic disasters. Now they were all running away. What about the outer colonies? Jake asked. There are billions of people living in those systems. You cannot just abandon them. They are acceptable losses, replied Krell coldly. Better to lose the rim worlds than risk the core systems. Acceptable losses? Jake's voice rose. These are living beings, families, children. You are talking about letting them die. Young human, said First Mind Zorvash, you do not understand. The void swarm cannot be fought. It can only be avoided. Those who try to fight it will only feed its growth. Jake stood up from his chair. The other humans in the delegation stood with him. Earth will not abandon the outer worlds. We will fight. The room erupted in what Jake could only describe as alien laughter. The sounds were strange and varied, but the meaning was clear. They thought humanity was foolish. Your species has existed for barely 50,000 years, said Krell. You have no understanding of what you face. The void swarm destroyed civilizations that were ancient when we were young. Maybe, said Jake. But we will not run away while innocent people die. Lisa Kane stepped forward. The human fleet is already moving toward the danger zone. We will evacuate as many civilians as possible. This is madness, said First Mind Zorvash. You will only delay the inevitable. The swarm will consume you and become stronger. Dr. Harper closed his holographic display. Perhaps, but we have to try. Jake looked around the room one final time. These beings claimed to be wise and advanced. They had technologies that could reshape worlds and fleets that could destroy stars. But when faced with true danger, they chose to hide. The human delegation is leaving, Jake announced. We have work to do. The humans walked out of the Great Hall. Behind them, the alien representatives continued their discussions about retreat and defense. Jake knew they would spend weeks arguing about the best way to abandon the Outer Worlds. As they walked through the station corridors, Lisa Kane spoke quietly to Jake. Our fleet is small. We have maybe 200 ships. The swarm has already consumed thousands of worlds. I know, Jake replied, but someone has to try. If we do nothing, the swarm will eventually reach the core worlds anyway. These aliens think they can hide forever, but they are wrong. Dr. Harper was checking his data pad. I have been studying the swarm's behavior. There might be a way to fight them, but it will require getting close. Very close, Jake nodded. Then that is what we will do. They reached the docking bay where the human ships were waiting. The vessels looked small and primitive compared to the alien warships around them, but they were crewed by humans who refused to give up. As Jake boarded his ship, he looked back at Nexus Prime Station. The alien representatives were still inside, planning their great retreat. They had turned their backs on billions of innocent lives only humanity was willing to take. A step forward into the darkness.